2020 has been the worst year in the United States for a long, long time. We had a pandemic, we had an economic recession, we had race riots, we had a contested election, we even had a Christmas bombing. The Christmas bombing was really the icing on the cake for 2020. Now, when's the last time we had a year this bad? A lot of you older people will say, well, 1968 was bad. Most of you don't remember. Looking at my stats, I know for a fact that nearly all of you don't remember 1968. But in 1968, there also was a pandemic. Martin Luther King was assassinated, and there were race riots as well. And Nixon was elected president. Nixon. One of my old head friends who remembers that time swears that Nixon is the devil incarnate. And I'm just like, okay, girl. I'm thinking to myself, how can the devil be incarnated in Richard Nixon and Dick Cheney at the same time? But I would never question my elders to their face, so I just say, okay, Nixon's the devil. I know full well Dick Cheney is the devil. But once again, that is beside the point. And yes, America has gone through bad things before and survived. There's really no point in getting to this tit for tat. What year was worse, 2020 or 1968? All suffering has value, and it's really pointless to compare them. I'm just joking. This whole video is about comparing suffering. I'm going to give you the 5 years in human history that were undeniably worse than 2020. So the next time one of your friends or family complains about how bad this year is, you could say, but at least it wasn't this. Now, obviously, if you are one of the many people who died this year, this video won't be for you. That is because you are currently dead and you cannot watch YouTube. If there is an afterlife and you are spending it watching my channel on YouTube, I cannot tell you how flattered I am. However, I'm also disappointed in the quality of this afterlife. I don't want to take anything away from you and your suffering and what 2020 did to you. So, what years were definitely worse than 2020? For starters, the number 5 position, 1945. What happened in 1945, you ask? You ask that question because you went to an American public school, so you have no idea what happened in 1945. I'll give you a very brief summary. For more information on this year and the events of 1945 and the years leading up to it, I will link at the bottom a wonderful documentary that you can watch, and I will also link a book because I've read in the comments of my own channel that some of you read books still. The Second World War was no joke. There's no use making fun of it at all. It was a horrible time in our history. If you look at the numbers, maybe the worst time ever. So many people died in that war. It was a tragedy on the greatest scale imaginable. For us, it's myth. For our grandparents, it was their lives. They lived through it. It's now kind of become the United States' epic story because we were still the good guys in 1945. We came in and we rescued people, so it's sort of our crowning achievement. And 1945 was the year that war was won, but at a significant cost in the Pacific and in the European theater. A lot of people died. A lot of Germans and Japanese died. Well, we kind of beat them. That's why they died. We kind of killed them because they were being bad.
Have you noticed that our caps have actually got little pictures of skulls on them?
I don't, sir.
Are we the baddies?
Anyway, even though we won that war in 1945, it was still a really rough year. Because how did we win that war? We dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. 2 atomic bombs, not just one. We dropped the first bomb to let them know we were serious. We dropped that second bomb to let them know we weren't playing around. Did we need a second bomb? A lot of people debate whether or not we needed the second bomb. Some people debate whether or not we needed the first bomb. I'm just going to say this. Dropping of those bombs opened up Pandora's box. We're still living in the shadow of a potential nuclear disaster.
Hell.
The doomsday clock is about 2 minutes away, maybe 1 minute away. It goes back and forth. Now we have to live with the legacy of that bomb. And we have to live with the fact that humans can now destroy the entire planet. That started in 1945. So even though we won the war, it came at a great cost. Call this a Pyrrhic victory. Also in 1945, the Bushes were married. From that marriage spawned an imbecile that got us into Iraq and tarnished the US's name forever and ever. I mean, Vietnam did that. Yes, Vietnam did that. People in the comments like, actually after Vietnam, our name was completely tarnished. But this was the icing on the cake for that. Now, I have a Minority Report standard, and I say that a crime isn't committed until the crime is committed. Also, 1945 was the last year of the Holocaust. Now, it wasn't the bloodiest year of the Holocaust, but it was when the death marches occurred. Basically, the death marches were the Nazis moving their prisoners from one camp to another, and many hundreds of thousands dying on the way. I don't want to go into too many details. It's pretty dark. But suffice it to say, there's a reason why you've never been invited to a Death March themed party. Like, no one's asking you to go to Runyon for their Death March birthday hike. It's really somber. That happened in 1945. Also, to top off 1945, Anne Frank died. This was an exceptional tragedy because I hear that Anne Frank was also a believer. 1945 was the worst year of World War II, in my opinion, because it ushered us into a new nuclear age. And we're still in that age today. And at any point, something could go south and we could all be gnawing on our pets. Michael! Number four, 1918, the start of the Spanish flu, and the last year of World War I. Once again, you might say, isn't 1918 a good year if World War I ended? Well, it kind of just got paused, didn't it? Didn't it just pop up 20 years later? I feel really bad for the people in 1918 who thought they were really fighting a war to end all wars. That's cute. Kind of, in the way, if you look back on it, like, we haven't really messed around like that since World War II. Since we've realized that we could do serious damage to each other, maybe World War I, if it is the first part of the Great World War, if you're looking at it that way, was a war to end all wars. But it really wasn't. And the people who made peace in 1918 didn't really make peace, did they? They just sort of hit the pause button for 20 years, let everyone get rearmored, and then they went right back at it. It's persistence. You know, they had a job to do, which was destroy the continent, and they did it. There are a lot of similarities between 2020 and 1918 because we have the pandemic as well. But 1918 was different because they also had a world war. They also had a Russian Civil War, and they had no internet, making 1918 way worse than 2020. Also, to top off 1918, as if a world war and a major pandemic weren't bad enough, it was the first year of daylight savings time. I guess people went outside in 1918, so the sunlight still mattered to them. But right now, I consider daylight savings time a major annoyance. And Arizona doesn't even observe it. So now you gotta do time math. Boo daylight savings time. Boo 1918. Boo. Number 3. Trace. 1347. The year the Black Death came through.
Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead! Bring out your dead!
Conservative estimates say a third. Other estimates put it at a half. A half of the population died from a horrible illness. The Black Death was basically the Thanos of diseases. It came through and it just halved the population. Cut it in half. 1347 isn't the first time it came through. It had come through before and it was going to come through again. This is before antibiotics. So right now, you can treat the Black Death. If someone gets the plague, all right, put them on some antibiotics. But back in the day, when there was nothing even remotely close to antibiotics, if you got the Black Death, you were probably going to die from it. Some people did recover. Some people were immune from it completely. It was spread by Yersinia pestis, which was spread through fleas, which were on rats. The rats spread it. And of course, it's an agrarian community. So there were rats everywhere and there were fleas everywhere. It was just a different time. People lived a different lifestyle, a filthier lifestyle, a more flea-ridden lifestyle. Luckily, we don't live that lifestyle right now. And like I said before, we have antibiotics. So should this pop up, as it occasionally does on Skid Row, we can do something about it. Also, as a result of the Black Death of 1347, Europeans used this as an excuse to massacre Jews. You say, but Maya, weren't they already going to massacre the Jews? Probably. This was the attitude of Europe for a long, long time. If you've listened to the entire video, you know that this attitude kept going for at least 600 more years, until finally the Jews got wise and were like, y'all are going to massacre us, aren't you? And Europeans like, no, I'm not going to massacre you. Yes, you are going to massacre us. And then they left. Good for them. The plague spread over the entirety of the Silk Road. So everybody got the plague. It wasn't just Europe. We just have the history from Europe. Now, one silver lining to the plague is that it basically cut the workforce in half. So surviving workers were better able to negotiate wages and more freedoms. Yes, this was a silver lining. No, you couldn't go back to 1347 and stop someone who was burying their entire family and say, hey, girl, don't you worry about it. There's going to be a silver lining. She'd slap you in the face. Why would you say such a thing? Number 2, 1177 BC, or thereabouts. What happened in 1177 BC? There is a book called 1177 BC, The Year That Civilization Collapsed, by a Mr. Eric Cline. If you are interested in this, I highly recommend you buy that book and read that book. Now, a lot of you petty people out there might be like, 1177 BC? Did they even have civilization to be collapsing in 1177 BC? Can a cave really collapse? Well, these were not cave people. These were late Bronze Age people. Yes, they did have civilization. And it was very bad for them that it collapsed. The exact year might not be exactly 1177. We just know it happened around that time. And how do we know? Well, nearly every major city was left in ruins, or it was abandoned. All around the Mediterranean. They had a sort of proto-globalization back then. The peoples around the Mediterranean traded with each other and were interdependent on each other. We don't know exactly why it collapsed. There are reports of sea peoples that came through. By sea peoples, we're probably talking about seafaring peoples, not an army of the guy from The Shape of Water. Actual people who came by sea. Why did they come through? Were they trying to escape a major drought or natural disaster and they needed food? Maybe. We don't know exactly why this happened, but we know that it did happen and that it was as catastrophic as the fall of Rome. I feel the late Bronze Age collapse doesn't get the shine that it deserves. Like, everyone's going on about the collapse of Rome, maybe because we know so much more about it, but that's what it is. In 1177, for some reason, the late Bronze Age civilization collapsed in some sort of catastrophic way, and it took hundreds of years to rebuild. So 1177 BC, or thereabouts, way worse than 2020, huh? Number 1, numero uno. The official worst year to be alive ever, 535 AD. 535 to 536 AD, and then it sort of lasted for about 10 years. What happened? Well, the sun went away. What? The sun went away? Yeah, the sun went away. Don't we need the sun? Yeah, we do need the sun. Yeah, the sun is very useful to us. Yeah, we need the sun. Could that happen again? Could the sun go away again? Maybe. I don't know. What apparently happened was a series of volcanic eruptions that spread a fog over the whole world that blacked out the sun and made it seem like it was moonlight and not sunlight. Now, guess what happened? Of course, you guess. Crops failed. A failure of bread was reported in Ireland. And we can assume that that failure of bread also happened over the rest of the world, because we have reports of widespread crop failure, of famine, of ash falling from the sky. What did people eat? Each other. I guess if you were lucky enough to be by the sea, or you were lucky enough to have access to mushrooms, I don't want to get too dark. I know this has been generally a very light video, so I don't want to bring it down, but cannibalism pops up. People get desperate, they cannibalize each other. I'll edit all of this out. So the evidence seems to be that a series of volcanic eruptions occurred and it laid waste to the crops for a couple of years. The people became very weak, and then a few years later, in 541 AD, the Justinian plague swept through. This was the first instance on record of the Black Death coming through, Yersinia pestis. Jerk. Total jerk, this plague. Yersinia pestis. What an ass. Anyway, it came through and laid waste to nearly everyone in its wake, including the Eastern Roman Empire. See, by this point, Rome had pretty much fallen, so the Eastern Roman Empire was the Roman Empire. This was under Justinian, and they called this the Justinian plague, even though he did not cause the plague. Kind of sucks that he gets the name for the plague, but whatever. Empires worldwide fell because what's a king? If a king can't give you bread, what good is he? Might as well eat him, right? This led to a minor ice age. Minor. They call it minor, but humans were alive, so it was major for us. Those major ice ages that happened before when we weren't around, those are minor to us. Isn't that funny? This is a very bad time to be alive. Officially, the worst time to be alive. Now, the plague keeps popping up in history. It's the second time it's even on this list. This is why I don't really mess with antibiotics like that. I think I take them only when prescribed by a doctor, for as long as prescribed by a doctor, and I never ask for them. Because humans are pretty much 1 in 5 against the plague. We got lucky this century with antibiotics, but don't think the plague isn't back in the locker room getting rubbed down by its coach, just waiting for a time when we slip up to come out like Mike Tyson and pummel us into extinction. Now, there are hundreds of years I am leaving off this list. Hundreds of individual years that were worse than 2020. I don't want to get into a 10-hour-long diatribe about human suffering, although I could, but I'm not going to do it for this. I just wanted to list off 5 years that were definitively worse than 2020. If I'm leaving anything off, I encourage you to put that in the comment section. Maybe I will research it and do a video the next time I'm feeling really gothy. But I just wanted to remind everyone that despite what the internet says, 2020 was not the worst year in human history. We did okay this year, all things considered. That having been said, 2020 is a really bad year. And I hope with all my heart that it's the worst year that we ever have to go through in our lifetimes. Subscribe!